About 30 some odd years ago, there's a book written by a guy named Alvin Toffler called The Third Wave. And in that book, Toffler talked about changes in our economy, how we have moved from an agricultural economy to a manufacturing economy to what he predicted in 1981, a move toward an information-based economy. And what we know is that Toffler was right. In Alabama, for example, antebellum, our economy was based on agriculture. It was cotton. Both before the Civil War and thereafter, cotton was the dominant part of our economy based on agriculture. But with the advent of mechanization, the mechanized cotton picker, those things, we saw the decline in the need for labor to work the farms, and so we saw the rise of industrialization. In Birmingham area, we saw the rise of the iron ore being created to make steel, so the mines and the factories that created there. So there was a changing in our economy. And in Alabama, we were always very pro-business. We were always about trying to get more industry coming into the state. And so manufacturing was very important to Alabama. In fact, throughout the 20th century in Alabama, our economic strategy was based on having low taxes and low skilled labor. So we could say to a company in Michigan or in Ohio or New York, if you will come south, if you'll come to Alabama, you'll have low taxes and you'll have low labor costs. You can make more money. And that was somewhat effective. We saw especially the development of textile mills because we had the cotton, and so we could create those mills. And the folks who worked there didn't get paid very much, and the business owners paid low taxes, so they were able to make more money. But as we got into the latter part of the 20th century, what happened to those companies that were coming based on cost? And what happened was they continued to move south to places like Mexico, the Dominican Republic, more recently to China, India, where they paid pennies on the dollar compared to what they paid in Alabama. And so with globalization and the rise of technology, we see that a lot of those low-wage, low-skill companies have left, and we are left with that third-wave economy that Toffler predicted, an economy that is based on information and knowledge. And so what is important for an economy is not what we pick out of the field or what we dig out of the mines and the earth. It's what's in people's heads. That's the value. That's how we can be competitive. It's through information and knowledge. And the economy that we're in today, it certainly reflects that. The Alabama Department of Industrial Relations predicted the declining occupations by 2014, and you can see in this slide sewing machine operators, textile machine setters, operators and tenders, file clerks, order clerks, computer operators, mail clerks, and mail machine operators. And you see that those are the jobs that are disappearing. A lot of those around the textile industry, which dominated the rural South and rural Alabama, have pretty much left us. Here are the jobs that are replacing those jobs. Medical scientists, computer software engineers, physician assistants, biochemists and biophysicists, home health aides, network systems and data communications analysts, aircraft mechanics and service technicians, medical assistants, a lot in the healthcare area. But what do you see looking at the old jobs that we're losing and those that we're gaining? We see a changing economy where the new jobs require a higher level of education and skills. And so the strategy that we've had in Alabama doesn't work very well. The idea of competing based on low taxes and low labor costs doesn't work in this kind of economy. We've got to have workers to fill the jobs of the new economy, and workers with a higher level of education, higher level of skills. And so it's a new game. It used to be that business would say, you know, what does labor cost? Now they say, what does labor know? And we're unprepared because of our underinvestment in education for this kind of new economy. And that's true in the Black Belt, is true in rural Alabama, and it's true throughout the South and the United States in general. So what do we do? The Black Belt has been particularly hit by these changes in the economy. We went from being the most populous and prosperous area of the state to being an area of desperate need. We saw the decline of agriculture. We saw the decline of the low-wage manufacturing that filled its place. And so what now? And so that's an important question for rural Alabama and especially the Black Belt. We work with a lot of communities and are asked that question, or asked to come in and provide help. And here's what we tell them. We tell them that a strong local economy is based on a strong community. You've got to have a foundation upon which to build a local economy. And a lot of these communities want shortcuts. They want to recruit a factory, recruit a Hyundai or a Honda or Mercedes-Benz into their community, and it's probably not going to happen because they're not prepared for that. We tell them there are several kinds of infrastructure that are needed to build a strong community. One, obviously, is a physical infrastructure. You must have roads and water and gas, utilities, and telecommunications as part of a physical infrastructure. And increasingly, telecommunications, broadband are part of that new infrastructure in an area where rural areas, and especially Black Belt, are very far behind. And we're trying to help with that with some broadband training and how to use it. But that physical infrastructure is very important. You have to have that foundation upon which to build. Another kind of infrastructure is a human infrastructure. A human infrastructure is having the people who can fill the jobs, those who are educated and trained. And a third kind of infrastructure that is particularly lacking in places like the Black Belt and rural Alabama is the civic infrastructure. By that we mean strong local leadership, community institutions like churches and schools and civic groups, citizen engagement, and a community mindset of pride and optimism. All of that civic infrastructure goes to provide a foundation on which you can build a local economy. You've got to have that infrastructure. A civic infrastructure, a human infrastructure, and a physical infrastructure are important. One of my favorite quotes is by Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And that is what we believe, and that is what we preach in the communities that we visit. One of those communities was in Uniontown, Alabama, which is in the western part of the state in Perry County. And it's a particularly hard-hit area and community with very high unemployment and very high elderly population, a very high minority population, and they've had a lot of problems. Back in 1999, they came to Auburn University and said, "What can you do to help us?" They went to our Vice President for Outreach, David Wilson, who was a native of Marengo County, the Black Belt, and he wanted to help. So he asked me to see what I could do to help in Uniontown, and so my background is in strategic planning, and so I said, well, I can go and help them do a plan, and so that's what I did. I went and worked with the mayor, and the mayor helped put together a committee of folks who served as a strategic planning steering committee. We went through a process, and we created a plan. And in that plan, there were a lot of things the government could do. But there are a lot of things in that plan they wanted that really couldn't be done by government, that you really needed some kind of entity. So we helped them create a community development corporation to do some of the things in the community that the government couldn't do. The mayor served as president of the Community Development Corporation, and he appointed the members. Well, fast forward to about a year later, there was an election for mayor in that community, and the mayor ran and was defeated. So everything that we had done, working through the mayor, sort of a top-down approach in that community, failed. We were back to square one because the new mayor cared nothing about that plan created by his predecessor. He cared very little about using the CDC where the old mayor still sat as president and his cronies were on the board. And so we had to figure out what can we do because we don't know. And so we decided that we'd get together a group of folks from that community to sit around and give us some guidance, tell us what we should do. And so we created a focus group, blacks and whites who came together in this small community for many for the first time ever. And we started off with two questions. The first was, what do you like about this place? And the second was, what would you like to change? And as they began to talk, what we found was that it didn't matter whether you were black or white, the things that you liked were the same. The things that you disliked were the same. And so they found through these conversations that they had a lot in common, that the things that drew them together were stronger than the things that tore them apart. And so they began to figure out what they could do working together to make Uniontown a better place, to have more economic development. And one thing they said was, this place is not very attractive, meaning there's sort of garbage around that needs to be cleaned up, but more importantly, it seemed unsafe because there were young people who were loitering around at night and evenings on the street. It made the place seem unsafe. And so they said in this group, we've got to do something to get them off the street. So they went to the mayor and the police chief, and they said, we need to enforce our no loitering laws. We need to get these young people off the street. And so after a series of conversations, they began to say, well, who are these kids who are out there on the street? Well, they're our nephew, they're our cousin, they went to school with our children. We know these people, and we know why they're there. They're there because they have some kind of an alcohol problem or a substance abuse problem. So they said, what can we do about that? And then they created among themselves an Alcoholics Anonymous group to try to work with those who had these kind of problems. And for me, and I think for them, this was an aha moment where they changed the way they were thinking about their role in the community. Before, what they were doing was saying, we're going to go to the mayor and the police chief to help solve this problem. And this had been the strategy in the past. It had always been somebody else is going to come in and solve our problems for us. We're going to get a grant from the outside. The mayor is going to get the outside consultants, and they're going to come in and save us. Here they said, here's something we can do. We can do something about this problem. And as they did this, they began to have a sense of empowerment, a sense of accomplishment, and they began to do more and more things to try to improve life in their community. And they gave themselves a name, Uniontown Cares. They began to do a lot of good there, and to see a greater sense of efficacy that they could make a difference in their community. And it brought about some positive change in that community. In fact, they still exist today. They're still doing things to make things better in Uniontown. So this was a turning point for that community, but also for us as an outreach unit to go and work in communities. So we think we know the things that can work. And what works is when you empower people. If you help them build their capacity to solve their own problems, then they can be effective. Getting the outside grant, getting the outside consultant is going to be unsatisfactory in dealing with the problems that these people face. They're too big. It requires all of them coming together, identifying what their assets are, pulling together, working together to try to make a difference. Only that can save these struggling communities. Another example that we modeled our effort on was what happened in Tupelo, Mississippi. My friend Vaughn Grisham has written about this in a great book called Tupelo, The Evolution of a Community. But there, back in the 1930s, Tupelo was one of the poorest places in Mississippi and one of the poorest places in the country. It had had a lot of labor strife, racial strife. It really was in bad shape. But they had a newspaper publisher named George McLean who came in and said, we need to do something about this, and he took a real leadership role in that community. And one thing he did, he tried to convince the business community to help the agricultural community, to help the farmers. So you need to do something to put more money in the pockets of these farmers so they can spend the money in your stores. The idea was, if we can work together, we can make something better in this community. And so they invested in a dairy program. They bought a bull. They were the sort of pioneers in artificial insemination. They began a dairy industry in Tupelo, Mississippi that became very profitable. They also created a community development foundation where they began to invest in themselves, meaning folks from throughout the community, the business community, private citizens began to invest in the foundation, and they began to invest in the community, and they began to have accomplishments. And so as they began to do more and more, it began to grow, and Tupelo transformed itself from the poorest place in Mississippi to one of the wealthiest places in Mississippi. They have the best medical facility in the South there for a regional medical center. They have the best schools in Mississippi. They just located a Toyota plant in their county. And so you saw a real transformation that began when people came together and said, what can we do if we work together? And so that's the recipe for making a difference in a community. Another place that has fascinated me and that we've worked with is a place called Demopolis, Alabama, which is about 20 miles down the road from Uniontown. And Demopolis is what we call an outlier. I mean, it's not like the rest of the Black Belt. It tends to have lower unemployment, higher wealth. Everything about it seems to be a little bit better than other parts of the Black Belt. So as we worked in the community, we began to ask the folks there, what is it about Demopolis and Marengo County that's different than other parts of the Black Belt? And the story the folks tell there was interesting to me. And the story they tell, and I think it's true, is that back when the schools in Alabama and the South were integrated, the folks in Demopolis, black and white, came together and said, we're going to maintain a strong public school system. We're going to maintain a strong, integrated public school system. Throughout the rest of the Black Belt in Alabama, almost every county now has public schools that are 100% black, and whites go to private academies. And what that does, in addition to diverting resources from the public schools, is it divides the community. Meaning in places that have very few resources, you have blacks and whites living separate lives, and you have those assets that are separated. Instead of working together, there's separate lives within small communities. Demopolis was different. They said, instead of coming apart, we're going to come together. And I think it made all the difference. The same story was in Tupelo. Tupelo made the decision that they would have strong integrated public schools. They made a rule that their sports teams could not play against segregated schools. And you see that the story of Tupelo was one of a great success. And so we believe that there's a real lesson there. The lesson is that we have to take advantage of all of our resources. We have to pull all resources together and maximize those, because every community has assets, no matter what they may be. And the key is to take all those assets and put them together so that you multiply their power and effectiveness. So when they come together, you can do more than when you divide them.